Welcome to Marketing Made Simple TV. My name is Jeff Ogden, the host of the show, and we're really excited to have one of our past guests back, Baer of Convince and Convert, and author of The Now Revolution. And what we're going to talk about today is utility, constructive content, how good constructive content creates customers. Again, Jay is a social media expert, and he also writes the blog, a very popular blog, Convince and Convert, and he's the co-author of a book called The Now Revolution. And Jay's working on a new book, which I think is coming out in the spring. So he's excited, and we're excited to hear about his new book. We're going to talk about three things today: how companies can break through the invitation avalanche and get on customers' radar, what types of content are most effective, and how content integrates with social media. So let's welcome Jay to the show.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me back. Great to be here.
Good to have you back, Jay. Yeah. So let's just start off with the same question we did in your last show. We'll just revisit that one. But who are you and what do you do?
I should come up with a totally different answer this time. It would be really fascinating. I will try to stick to the script. However, I am Jay Baer. I run a social media and content consultancy called Convince and Convert. We work with corporate clients and agencies all across North America to take their social and content programs from good to fantastic. As mentioned, I write the Convince and Convert blog. I co-host the weekly Social Pros podcast, which is a podcast for social media professionals, and co-author of The Now Revolution, working on a new book that's basically based on the things we're going to talk about today, effective content marketing.
Good, Jay, and I love talking about content marketing. It's one of my favorite subjects. So let me ask a question. I'm going to give you a quote from a prior guest on the show, Joe Paluzzi of the Content Marketing Institute. And Joe said to me, which was interesting, he said, your content has to be best of breed or your customers will ignore you. What is your reaction to that comment?
First of all, I love Joe. In fact, my blog is rated as the #1 content marketing blog in the world from Content Marketing Institute, Joe's company. And Joe and I actually do a lot of work together, so I will tread carefully here. I think he is right, but my challenge to that is, what does best of breed mean? Does it mean better than your competitor? Does it mean world class? I define it differently. I define it as your company content needs to be so good that people would gladly pay you for it.
That's a good measure. You know, I'll tell you another funny story. Scott Stratton of Unmarketing, who's a future guest on here, he talks about blog posts being so good. He tells a story of one blogger who blogs infrequently, and when he's driving and he sees an update from this blogger, he pulls his car to the side of the road because he wants to read it right away because it's so interesting. And my thought is, and I think the same thing is true of content, if you can write stuff that pulls cars to the side of the road, I want you to write for me. So that's kind of what you're saying, too.
So I have a funny story about that story, which is that the blogger that Scott references is actually me. He talked.
To pull cars over. I am really glad to meet you.
Scott's been very kind to me. We're good friends, and he talks about me in that story and all of the speeches that he gives around the world. So
good. It's a great story, and I use it all the time when people want to write guest posts for me. I just say, "Hey, if you can pull cars over, you can write for me."
I'm glad to have inspired your guest post guidelines, Jeff.
Well, and actually, I said that to Scott when I invited him to be on the show. He accepted immediately.
Good.
So let's go back to the thing I'm digressing a little. I apologize for that. But let's talk about, your content of, you got to have content that people would be willing to pay for. And Marketing Sherpa study says creating compelling content is their #1 problem. How do you create content that people will pay for?
I think there's a couple of challenges there. One is that most companies have a hard time justifying creating content that's not about them, right? I mean, historically, marketing tells stories about the company, and most really good content, what I call a utility, YOUtility, truly useful content, is not about you. It answers customer concerns and is inherently helpful, and in so doing, you keep your brand close to the vest of those customers, right? So it's not about saying, let's find a new way to package up our own story. It's about providing something that is inherently useful, and therefore you don't have to tell stories at all. So, for example, there is a guy who drives a taxi in Alberta, Banff, or Banff, Alberta, I should say. And Banff is a ski town in Canada, very popular amongst tourists. There's lots and lots of bars and restaurants and lots of taxi drivers. He publishes a little map called TaxiMike's Guide to Alberta, where to eat and drink. And twice a year, he runs off a bunch of copies at FedEx on bright yellow paper, double-sided, and he has a big phone number and a map of downtown, and then it says, here's the best place to get a drink, here's the best place for a smoking patio, here's the best place for a first date, best sports bar, and they're all over town. Every restaurant has these at the front counter. So after a long night of hanging out in Banff, you're thinking, hey, I should get a cab back to my hotel. Are you going to ask the waitress to call you a cab? Are you going to walk out on the sidewalk and raise your arm? No. You're going to reach into your pocket and pull out this map that you've been looking at all night that has TaxiMike's phone number in 2-inch high letters. That he understands that it is about being a utility first and about marketing second.
That TaxiMike is an interesting story because you're really talking about creating content that prospective buyers can actually use. I think that is a great measure for. So how do you recommend companies, large and small, they're going to get together in a room and they're going to say, okay, what should we work on in terms of content? What should they be talking about in those meetings?
I actually have a 5-step process for becoming a utility. And the first step is the one that sadly is most often overlooked, which is figuring out what is it that your customers actually need. There's a lot of sources for that data. You can look at search term data, you can look at web analytics data, you can look at social chatter data, all those you should do. If you have a search engine on your own site, you should look at what people are typing in that box, so internal search data. You should actually ask your customers. This is where customer surveys and customer focus groups can be quite useful. And then probably the most important thing that is almost never done is that marketing, who of course is typically tasked with content creation, needs to build an information bridge to the front lines of the organization. The problem with marketers is that they don't know what's actually going on in the company. Almost never, because they're doing marketing. The people that know what's going on in the company are in sales, customer service, and operations, period, right? That's it. That's the list. So the companies that are best at utility, at creating truly useful content, are the companies that create this information bridge between marketing and the front lines. And maybe that's an email, maybe it's a weekly meeting, maybe it's Yammer or some kind of internal social network, but there has to be a culture of sharing where somebody in sales says, you know what, I got a really interesting customer from a prospect today. We should make sure that we answer that question in an interesting way so that nobody ever has to ask it again.
I like that description, and you're exactly right. And they talk about integrating marketing and sales all the time. What does that really mean? Well, you're right. You got to get in the car with a salesperson and go on a sales call. I mean, come on. You know, it doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, or you have customer service people. Go in there and take some calls with them. You know, and get involved. So, yeah.
I've been in the agency and consulting business for almost 20 years, and this is my 5th agency startup that I have founded. And what I always tell my people in every company is, you know, the number of marketing insights that happen in a conference room is really, really small. If you want to be great at marketing, you need to get out of your office and get into the front lines and actually interact with operations and salespeople and customers. That's where insights are bred, not sitting around a conference table talking to the rest of the marketing team.
So let's talk about media, because obviously if we go along and we understand what customers want, right? We go out with salespeople, we talk to customers, and we say, okay, I understand that, you know, they want a map to the city. Do we create a paper map and make copies at Kinko's? Do we create an iPhone application? Do we create a YouTube video? You know, where do we go with this stuff? It just it seems to me, for so many marketers are confused.
Yes, Jeff, that is a great question, and really a challenge because there's no right answer. There's answers that are perhaps more right, but there's no unequivocal right answer. One of the examples that I talk about in my presentation on YOUtility is Phoenix Children's Hospital, and they have a fantastic mobile app, and it's a car seat helper. So you put in how heavy is your kid, how tall is your kid, what kind of car do you have, and it recommends the best car seats for you. Really super useful, right? That is something you would pay for. That is a YOUtility. It's a utility, great app. So Phoenix Children's Hospital rolls out this app, but it could have been a lot of other things, to your point, right? It could have been a blog post or a series of blog posts. It could have been a video blog post or a series of video blog posts. It could have been an ebook. It could have been an actual real book that they distributed through pediatricians. It could have been an event on a Saturday where everybody drove their cars down to the hospital and they had firemen helping you install your car seats. All of those could have been the right answer. In their case, the mobile application became the right answer because when they did the initial customer research that we were talking about a moment ago, they actually took the important second step of saying, oh, and by the way, how old are you? What are your media habits? Do you use mobile devices? If so, are you on iPhone or Android? They actually combined customer insight research with media habit research and realized that the mobile application was the best option for them.
That's interesting, and I think you're right. For that particular example with car seats, you combine the real-time utilization of it, which you buy a mobile device, they always have it with them. But you're right, there is no right answer. But I think, and I'd like to ask you about this too, that in today's world, you need to understand buyers better than you ever needed to before. What do you think about that?
I completely agree because buyers don't clump the way they used to, right? It used to be a lot easier to achieve top of mind awareness with whatever population you were trying to reach, but now with media fragmentation, web fragmentation, the amount of sort of message blocking that can be done, whether it's a pop-up blocker or a DVR, they all sort of work the same way. You really do have to understand precise and at a granular level how customers behave or how your target customers behave. And the sort of cruel paradox of that is that it's harder than ever because there's so many more places that consumers do hang out that you have to understand not just how your customers behave vis-a-vis watching television, but also how they consume print and radio and a multitude of digital channels. It's never been harder to be a marketer, and it's never required more math. I think than it does now. It's not for the faint of heart.
It's good. I think it's the world. One of the things you said in the book is that the world changed more in the last 3 years than it did in the prior 30. And I thought that was a really interesting comment because the amount of change is accelerating and happening faster. Tell me a little bit about that, about how the world has changed and why these practices that existed in the 80s and 90s don't work anymore.
Well, I mean, there's probably 25 either causes or symptoms of that shift. But I think categorically, it's that what has changed is that companies have to operate so much faster, which is why the book is called The Now Revolution. That speed wins now inherently. That's a big shift. Clearly, the ability for customers to have as much of a seat at the table as the brands do in terms of messaging and how companies are perceived. This idea that companies have controlled the message is a bit of a fallacy. You've never really controlled the message. You just thought you did because of word of mouth. But now it's quite obvious that companies don't control the message. That's a big shift. And I think one of the other things that's pretty interesting is that nowadays, companies are actually competing for attention and competing for mind share side by side, pixel to pixel with real people. So here's an example. If you take a look at your Facebook news feed or your Twitter feed, what you'll see is something like this. Your results may vary a little bit, Jeff, but generally speaking, what you'll see is your wife, your mom, a company, your friend, another company, your other friend, a company, right? So literally you have this lattice work of your closest personal relationships and then companies that you have chosen to support. And that is a fundamental marketing change. Because today you may go and send email to your friend and then receive email from a brand. It's literally side by side. It's a very fascinating circumstance. My mom is not buying television ads to try and get my attention. My wife is not buying radio time. My friends are not buying outdoor. But yet in social media and to a somewhat lesser degree digital marketing overall, companies and people are side by side. And so it requires organizations and brands to fundamentally change the way they approach conversations with the public, because you can't have people behaving this way and companies behaving this way over here. It doesn't work. So what's happening is that companies are being forced to behave more like people, and that is an uncomfortable place for them to be in many cases.
That's a really interesting takeaway, that companies need to start behaving more like people. This has been a fascinating discussion, Jay. Let's just talk about some takeaways. If you're a person watching this show and you're a VP of marketing in a mid-sized company and you had a chance to talk to that man or woman directly, what would you say?
I think we talked about it earlier. I would say, is your marketing so useful that people would pay you for it? And if not, why not? Is it because you are not culturally supportive of marketing that doesn't necessarily preach your own benefits? Is it because you don't have the requisite customer insights to create company content that is a utility, or is there some other impediment there? But I think if you commit to, let me put it in a neater way, Jeff. The difference between selling and helping is only 2 letters. But in modern marketing, those are the 2 most important letters in the world. And you got to get behind that.
Great stuff, Jay. I want to thank Jay for this show today. Great takeaways. Between selling and helping, a 2-letter difference. What a great sound bite there. A terrific one. So I would say, if you want to check out Jay, go to convinceandconvert.com. Also check out his book called The Now Revolution. So we'd really like to do that. I also want to ask you to support our sponsors. At the bottom of the screen, you see 3 names: Avatage, Digital Ethos, and YOUtility. We're actually adding 2 more names in the very near future for our sponsors. Our sponsors make the show possible, so please investigate them, learn about the great companies and what they do. In fact, YOUtility does this great platform we create the show on, which enables us to create our television on the internet show. A reminder that Marketing Made Simple TV publishes every Thursday at noon.